So, ladies and gentlemen, I'm trying to make it closer to the open. I want to try and keep these live streams short and sweet. A few people are like, yeah, I don't mind a 30-minute live, but it's still too long. So I'm going to be very, very quick. So what's the story? Well, is the AI bubble about to burst? I mean, NASDAQ this morning's taken a little bit of a tumbler to the downside, but it's only because of what news has hit the market regarding nvidia. So let's just get straight into it to give you guys everything that you need to know today. So stocks are slipping on the idea that softbank have decided to sell their major stake, their entire stake in nvidia. That's not good news because nvidia is effectively going to be declaring its earnings in 8 days' time. So what's the idea? But I mean, nvidia is down nearly minus 2% in the marketplace, but the idea is this: if positions are starting to be offloaded in nvidia, the market's going to look at that and say, hold on, man, this is the biggest tech stock in the marketplace. That means that if nvidia comes down, does everything else come down? Well, Google's been doing all right. Microsoft's all right. Meta hasn't been doing okay. But maybe everyone's like, yeah, there is a chance that everything is overvalued. But the bigger thing is the US government shutdown coming to an end? At any moment, we're going to know. So if you start seeing the NASDAQ climbing up today, it might be on the resilience that the US government's about to reopen. And then they'll come back to the idea of what's going on with nvidia. Okay, so this is something to really be paying attention to. So keep an eye out on nvidia, ladies and gentlemen, because the earnings per share is due in 8 days' time. And we're seeing quite a bit of volume coming into play, given that in yesterday's price action, it did relatively okay. You know, now, obviously, you want to know what the story is. Have you heard this? Not that. But Zcash has just taken a shoe back to the downside. Quickly breaking it down, just have a look at that, because that is, it's very interesting how it's dropped. Like, that's a nice 26% drop. Not doing too bad, but a lot of people have been trying to short this bad boy in hope that it's going to come down, but it hasn't really given them that light of day. But we're starting to see a very interesting structure right here. So what you really want to be looking out for, guys, is, of course, you've got a nice little M play, retrace, continuation to the downside. That could be on the cards for this asset. So those of you that are playing that, just be very careful. You're looking for a little bit of a retrace first to head back into this previous psychological range to then try and roll over. Now, going into Bitcoin, you heard about this madness. China accuses the US of stealing 13 billion Bitcoin tied to the 2022 Luban mining pool hack. All right, so we got tariff stories. We got a good relationship between Donald Trump and Xi Jinping, but China's like, nah, man, you guys are stealing Bitcoin. It's clear as day that it's the US versus China in AI, in cryptocurrency, and who's going to win at it first. Remember, we're going into data mining story, data centers, and that's where all the attention is really starting to brew. And who is going to be able to power all of this? How is the US going to be able to power it when they literally have 0 nuclear reactors, whereas China has 43. So you can appreciate that most data centers they're going to be doing really well out there. But check out data center companies, the guys who create the data centers, build the manufacturers behind it all, construction companies. There's so much that you can invest in, not just on the back of NVIDIA. Everyone's like, NVIDIA. Yeah, but who makes things for NVIDIA? What other industries are going to benefit from the back of that? Now, going into cryptocurrency price action, just to break it all down for you, Bitcoin, we saw a nice little sweep yesterday going into last night's Asian session. Yesterday's projections came out wonderfully in the Asian session, and I gave the guys the heads up at the end of the live stream last night that we were expecting movement to the upside, and then they've effectively rolled it back down again. We've got this little problem down here with the psychological ranges, and again, I'm just looking on X, and everybody's just like, Bitcoin's got to drop, it has to drop, it has to go down. All right, cool. Like, let's just go into the ETF. I mean, there's some maneuvering on the ETF. I mean, you got these little whatever. But there's maneuvering on the ETF. We're not seeing any Coinbase Prime deposits. So that's something that we can work with. Going into the balance of the ETF itself, just to put into perspective, you can see that we're now down at 795,000. Okay. So it's not really great. I mean, like Bitcoin, if we just go into looking at where we have been, It's been relatively negative in terms of the ETF. Investors are starting to move themselves away from riskier assets. But the thing that's riding the market right now, guys, is the idea of the US government shutdown when it reopens. Because when that does reopen, we're going to get ourselves the data that the market needs to effectively make a decision. Are we going to get rate cuts or not? And this is what you've got to be very careful of. There's too many sentiments or drivers of sentiment that are causing price action to go up and down. 1 minute we're getting a rate cut. Next minute, the Fed is a little bit hawkish. Now we're in a US government shutdown. Now we're potentially going to be getting a reopening of the US government. Cool. Nvidia stake has been sold by SoftBank. Oh no, AI is going to burst. And then you've got other companies that are doing really well behind the stories of AI. Investors are looking left and right, but fundamentally, interest rates are going to get cut. That means money's going to be cheaper. So the projections in the future are looking promising. They just got to, get out all the weak investors, pull things back because everything is overvalued. In terms of overvalued, whoa. Okay, we've just seen some very interesting behavior here. So nearly 60,000 Ethereum worth 214 million has been transferred from Binance wallet to an unknown wallet. Okay, we got some movement. There's some very interesting behavior right now on Ethereum. Going into Bitcoin's price action, my only issue that I've got, guys, is this. There's barely any liquidity. Over the weekend, they sold it all. They gave us a nice little big pump to the upside and gave us a nice little selling. Okay, so 21 million and 63 got sold last night, just after last night's live stream. There's not really any participants coming into play. I'm not really looking to sell. And be careful. If NASDAQ's going up and Bitcoin's going down, it can mean that investors are like, yo, we don't really want the Bitcoin risk. We need to come out of that and start going into what we know. Now, looking at NASDAQ, it's doing relatively okay. It's starting to make a little bit of a pumpalicious to the upside. And we've got these bids down here on Bitcoin. And if you remember yesterday, Bitcoin was slumping as NASDAQ was climbing. Okay. And then NASDAQ came down to then make an aggressive reversal, but Bitcoin barely climbed up. Be mindful that investors are still seeing Bitcoin as a risk on asset. You can pump the idea of, Bitcoin's the future and all that, but to the legacy markets, as in Wall Street traders, their obligation is to the clients. And if the clients see that they're in positions that are giving them a drawdown, and that's because of Bitcoin, they're going to request, get out of that exposure, get rid of the ETF. I don't want that. Go into gold, go into silver, go into what we know. And I do believe that once Bitcoin truly does start to become a more of a stable asset, then Wall Street traders will then start to encourage using Bitcoin, buying Bitcoin, because they can use it as a means of hedge or store of value, or just to take some speculation on it. Okay. But right now it's still up in the air. You'd need Bitcoin's market cap to really go to around 5-6 trillion to really get investors to say, yeah, you know what? Let's just put our money over here because it's not too volatile and we can really move size within Bitcoin purely because of the actual value of it in terms of its price. All right. So just take that into consideration when you are considering Bitcoin. Now, going over into other assets. So you've got gold. It's currently topping out. And the problem that we've got is this. Gold has marked up on the excitement that, yes, the US government's going to be opening. That means we're going to get interest rate cuts because we're going to get some data. All right. So when you see gold going up and then the NASDAQ not really moving up too much, could mean that investors are trying to protect themselves. But if you then start seeing the NASDAQ climbing and then gold's pulling back, that can mean that investors don't need to be in safe havens anymore. Let's just start putting some money into risk. Okay, so that's something that you've got to take into consideration. Going into the pre-markets as well, you've got Nvidia. It's gapping down ever so slightly, but not really too much. I'm not too concerned about it. And look, with all the speculation behind Nvidia, near its all-time highs, man. It's like there's nothing to be worried about. That means investors don't really care. They don't care about this entire stake that's been sold by SoftBank. Okay. Going into other assets as well, going into oil, you can see oil is pumping up, and that's usually a bit of a problem for the stock market when oil starts to pump because investors look for safe havens and commodities are one of those asset classes, okay? So just take that into consideration when you're trading that. Volatility index, currently trading flat, right? It's not really doing anything, and when the VIX itself is pretty much flat, it means that investors are somewhat complacent. All right. They don't need to be worried about anything. So they don't need to hedge anything. And when you see the NASDAQ making such an aggressive move in the pre-markets, and then you don't see the VIX doing anything, it can just give you an idea that maybe they're just positioning the NASDAQ. They're bidding for the NASDAQ, quickly buying everything up so that when they do come into the open, then everything's going to pump, hypothetically. But if you're not seeing movement in the VIX itself, it can give you an idea that maybe investors are like, okay, we're cool. We don't need to hedge. You know, the US government's going to reopen, so it's happy days. We're going to get our data. And then, of course, we're going to get the terms on whether we're going to get interest rate cuts or not. Now, Mirren, he wants 50 basis points. So investors are taking that and saying, you know what? Yeah, 50 basis points, man. That's what we want. Okay, cool. Plenty of liquidity to the downside, more than likely. Don't think rate cuts will happen when inflation data comes out. Well, the idea is that inflation data is due to be released on Thursday, but there's nothing definitive just yet. I mean, today they could turn around and say, yep, US government is reopening. And yesterday, there were some statistics that were released saying that we think it's going to be either on Thursday, Friday, we can even go into the 26th of November. That's how far they are projecting that the US government is likely to reopen. But it's going to be an interesting story to see how long the market does stay, the government does stay closed for, you know, because this is the longest in history. Now, quickly going over into a little bit of open interest on Bitcoin. Just want to identify it again. So we don't really have anything happening just yet. And this area here seems to be interesting. And of course, they're starting to load up positions over here. So that's really interesting that a lot of short sellers are actually making bank right now off the back of Bitcoin going down. But just be very mindful. Any bout of data that comes out that is beneficial for the marketplace, Bitcoin's more than likely going to try and rally to the upside. So just take that into consideration, ladies and gentlemen. Use the VIX. When the VIX pumps, that's when you start preparing yourself to buy. When it starts to come down, that's when assets effectively start to make a recovery back up. Okay. Now, going over into Solana. Solana, again, very tricky price action with cryptocurrency, Ethereum consolidating. I hate it when Ethereum consolidates. So just take that into consideration when you are trading crypto today. At any moment, we can find out about the US government reopening. So please take that into consideration when you are trading today. So with that being said, guys, I said I was going to keep it short and sweet. Mad love and respect. We're going into the open in the next 2 minutes. Please trade safely, and I will be tuning into you all later on this evening, guys. Mad love and respect. Take care of yourselves, and we'll talk later.